Hey, Jimmy. Good to see you.
Hey, Gav, just before we start, I want to say that whatever is happening this time of the year, we all have the giggles. So during this conversation, we're going to laugh a lot because we're all feeling a bit silly today. But it is AI silly season, so I think that's
Well, it's funny. I worked
okay.
in newspapers for 20 years, and August is silly season.
Oh.
August is like there was a story in the papers about a cafe getting planning permission for tables outside. That was a news story in a national newspaper because it's August. So it is silly season.
Nothing going on.
Nothing happening.
Although it's the opposite in
Yeah.
AI. It's silly season because so much is
Well,
going
I was
on.
going to say
Yeah.
AI. Tons to talk about. I'm going to pick this sort of theme. We're going to hit on if it's okay with you, that I think is a kind of an overarching one that's emerging across transparency and AI, and this phrase I keep seeing repeated about AI being a black box.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I know what we're talking about, but maybe just introduce me to that idea. What do we mean when we're talking about AI black box? What's happening? What are people saying about it? And then on the transparency theme, what can we do about it? It's arguably something that's holding back AI a bit. Is this black box concept that we don't know what goes on inside? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, it is. I think to start, if you think about anything being opaque and you can't see behind the curtain, you pass a question in and you get an answer back. Understanding, we have a really good understanding of how the answer is generated and given back to us. It's transformer architecture. It's choosing the best prediction for the next word and sentence, etc. And so it's giving us back the most likely answer from the information it's consumed and trained on. But if a human was to think about, like, what does black box mean to them from an AI usage perspective, the easiest way maybe to explain it is if you were to ask a human being who had the same knowledge that the large language model has a question, the human's answer would contain the same elements as the answer from the generative AI model, but it would be not the exact same words. And also there's a thing called temperature, and setting in a generative AI model would mean if you ask the model the same question several times, it gives slightly different variations of the same answer. And then, of course, we all are familiar with the term hallucination, where it'll give a crazy answer to the same question, but that is getting less and less with the newer models. But when people talk about it today in the media, we've moved on from that because everybody has a consensus that GenAI is just generating content based on the question you ask it in a predictive manner. So we're no longer talking about that as being black box.
Okay.
Now we're talking about GenAI being used for a purpose, for a use case. And let's call it making a decision. So the one that's always used as a terrifying one is picking which CV or resume is the best person for a job based on the content in that. And loads of things come in, like bias and ethnicity and people where they're living, where they're from, their address, their age, their gender, all this kind of stuff. So because of those concerns, when a application or process uses GenAI to make a decision, people want to know why the decision was made or how the decision came about. And that's the black box we're talking about, where when GenAI is being used, folks want to understand why it made that decision based on the criteria it was given. And we hear this term explainability thrown around a lot. And that's been thrown around for many years before GenAI, when it was neural nets, etc. And that is explaining how the decision was made. And back in those days, it was things like line charts, etc., show you the parts of the information that had the greatest impact to the decision being made. But in today, we should do much better than that, and we can do much better than that.
Okay, so talk me through that a bit, because I'm remembering the very first thing you said is, which you ask a human a question and they give you an answer. You can say, well, how did you work that out? How did you come to that conclusion? And they can say, well, I associated that piece of information with this piece of information, blah, blah, blah. So is that what we're talking about? that's what people are coming to expect and maybe should expect to be able to do with AI, and particularly as it's making sort of enterprise level decisions. How? I mean, the how is a tiny but important word in all of this.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of framing it. I don't think so. So if you have
There I go again.
no, but it's a really fair
Yeah.
question. And the reason I say that is if you ask a human being. So the reason all those great detective shows have the scene in the interview room where they're grilling the perp is the I think their term they use, but they ask them the question and they ask the question a different way, and then they try to catch them out. So if you ask a human a question, they give you an answer, and you say, why did you give me that answer? How did you come up with that conclusion? When they give you the answer, you don't, if you can't trust the conclusion, can you trust the answer leading to the conclusion? And the same thing is true for a generative AI model. You say, here's 7 pieces of information, give me the answer. It gives me the answer and say, how did you come up with this? When you're asking a model how it came up with something, it's not actually answering. A human is answering that. Or they're lying, right? They're deciding not to answer the question. But a GenAI model is just going predictively again, starting fresh, saying, okay, I had this context previously. Here's what I want to say based on the prediction algorithm. So, or the most likely prediction algorithm. So they're not actually answering the question you asked. They're trying to give the answer they think is the right set of words that make the answer. And so to provide transparency or explainability, what you need to be able to do is break up the answer they initially gave you and figure out which parts fell into which category. And it goes much, so that's what GenAI model, just asking questions and getting answers back. But it gets far more complicated when you talk about agents. So agents, a simple agent will have, as we always talk about, have a brain, which is the model. It will have a purpose, which is its tasks, as opposed to your tasks or outcome. And then it will also have the tools it can do that with. And so if you give one agent start it off or give it a piece of information or an event that it caused to do something, when it achieves the what, so it achieves its purpose, it's what, that's not enough because you need to know how it achieved its purpose, back to your how question. And if that how is bad, the outcome no longer matters. So I'll use a gratuitous example to make my point. If you said to your other half, oh, I'm busy today, would you mind going into the bank and taking out 200 euros? And they say, sure. And then you come home that evening and say, oh, by any chance, did you get a chance to get the 200 euros from the bank? And they say, yeah. And you go, great. And you get the 200 euros and you're thank you very much. And then later on you go, just out of interest, how did you get the 200 euros? Was it the ATM? Was it the bank teller? And they say, well, no, I was in a hurry, so I just used a gun. And I asked the teller to give me 200 euros and I ran out. And so with an agent, the agent doesn't have a moral compass or doesn't have, a full lifetime of being thought right from wrong and understanding consequences, real world consequences of their actions. And so an agent, how you can't guarantee an agent will do something in the how you want it to do, especially if you want to foster autonomy. And so after the fact, you do want to understand how the agent achieved their task. So a real example for an agent might be, and we always use databases because they're simple to interact with and they're simple to, certainly for agents, and they're simple to understand how something might go wrong in the how section. So if you were to say delete a company called Random Company LLC from our customer list because they decided not to renew their contract, and the agent went in and said, done, Random Company LLC are no longer in our database. And you say, brilliant. Just out of interest, how did you achieve that? And they say, I deleted all customers starting with the letter R. And they achieved the task, but the how really messed things up. So that explainability is much more complex when you move out of it. It's already complex when you talk about GenAI, but then when you move out of GenAI and talk about agents, when it's interacting with lots more components, tools, services, etc., then it becomes way more complicated. And so you need two things. You need in CalypsoAI, we call that Agentic Fingerprints. So understanding after the fact, every thought the agent had, every interaction it had, every decision and action it took. And so when you know that and all of the things that tried that didn't work out, because agents are far from perfect and they will make lots of mistakes, understanding what things they attempted that were unsuccessful and then the things they attempted that were successful. And even if they're successful, they may not be right.
Okay.
So the example we just gave, we achieved our target, but we did it in a really bad way. But now you can understand what went wrong. If you didn't have the explainability, you'd go back and you'd say, someday in the future, wait, why are, Rinky Dink LLC not in our database? What happened? And you're trying to figure out what happened to that company. But when you've got the agentic fingerprints, you can go back in and say, oh no, it deleted the thing. You can possibly undo that from a backup immediately, right? So you can take a remediation action super quick if you can understand how and why it made its decisions.
Okay.
That's something that's critical for agentic workflows.
Okay. Now, as usual, you've made all that sound very simple in terms of what you need is agentic fingerprints.
Yeah.
And this is obviously something that you and your team here at CalypsoAI have spent a lot of time on and applying a lot of brain power and manpower and agent power to. Like in the relatively simple terms, how does that work? You have to because as you described, you have to break down each passage of activity that an agent takes and identify it and it's an enormous technical feat to do that. No one else is doing it as far as I know. I'm pretty sure no one else is doing it. What can you tell me about, let's say, inside our black box in Calypso AI? What are the biggest challenges of doing that, of building the agentic fingerprint as a feature, with a key feature within a product?
Yeah, I guess like with all things, deciding what you're trying to accomplish and making sure that it fits the need of the gap that you're trying to solve. That's number one, and being really crisp and clean on defining that. And so it starts by being crisp and clean on defining what an agent is and how it works. And so when you understand that, you then need to understand how you get the information you need from that. So I like to always start with agents from humans. So if I wanted to understand how somebody was doing a job, I'd probably, actually we have this in the world today, an apprentice. So an apprentice learn on the job. And they, let's say it's an electrician, they go around with the electrician and they end up doing simpler tasks. But what they're not doing, the difference is they're not writing down, well, maybe some of them do, but typically they don't have a notebook saying at 11:24 a.m. they did this, at 12:17 they did this. And so the very first step is recording everything the agent does. The does is easy. So the does is in the real virtual world, which is a messed up thing to have to say, but that's the truth these days. So there's the real world. There's the virtual world that's opaque. Then there's the real virtual world, where you're using tools to do things in the virtual world. So with an agent, we can see what it's doing with tools really easily. That's the real virtual world. But the virtual world, where it's thinking, it's like Inception at the moment, that movie, right? But it's what it's thinking and all of the iterations and, with chain of thought models, etc., all of the various thoughts it has and how it ultimately gets to the one it decides is right. And so if you can parse all of those chain of thoughts and have a full record in a chronological order, and then you see where it peels off into an action or separates into a separate question, then you think, how do you represent that in a graphical way? And the most obvious one to me is like a decision tree. So a decision tree, leaves and nodes, and what you have is you've got this top-down exploding node graph of all the thoughts and decisions that got you there. And the relationships are defined within that structure. And all you have to do then is define which one is the path that made it to the success. Once you do that, everything else by definition is a unsuccessful avenue, a cul-de-sac that it went down. And so if you graph that out, then you've achieved the explainability. Everything it did, everything it thought, every action it took, and it's graphed in a chronological top-down view. That gives humans a really quick and easy understanding of what the agent did.
Okay. So the successful branch, sorry, by definition, shows you success. Arguably, the unsuccessful branches are more interesting.
Sometimes they are. So you hear of really successful people saying they learn more from their failures than their successes. And I do think so. When agents fail, they don't just try the next, they don't come up with 5 things, try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They come up with the best thing they think, they try it, and then they understand, or they don't understand, but they see why it didn't work. And then they use that as a question back saying, hey, I'm still trying to achieve this thing. I tried this. This is what happened. What else should I try? And then they get another thought. And so watching that process is actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen that experiment I think it was in a zoo where there was chimpanzees and there was this box that would give them like food and they had to try different combinations of things, and you just watch, and I probably wasted half my life doing this, but you watch it and you see, okay, they're trying almost mechanically or methodically for sure different things to try get the food out of the box. And I feel like agents are at that stage right now where it might be obvious to a human being exactly which one is the highest chance of success. But for an agent, they do tend to have more waste cycles than a human, but they operate at machine speed. So by the time the humans actually typed out the thing they want to do that they know was the right path, the agents probably got there already.
Yeah. Like fascinating, because they, those failures as well, I suppose, and we had a conversation before about language and about they think and they whatever, and you can argue about the they and the think in that sentence, but it gives you insights into the pathways that they take, and then that obviously has implications for security and for cybersecurity, and obviously Calypso is a cybersecurity company that are probably very valuable to CalypsoAI as a company, but to the customers and to the to partner organizations, and all these, to see how agents, which are still theoretical to a lot of people, how they think and act. And we talk about thought phase and action phase, and what you can expect, and what we're at this. I have to keep saying this out loud, is we're at this sort of fascinating sci-fi part of the journey where sci-fi is coming real, and we're sitting talking about how quickly agents act and make decisions or whatever. So I just want to sort of get that out of my own head, in terms of that decision tree that you've just described and you've showed me on the Agentic Fingerprints feature. Outcome analysis is another thing that we've talked about, which is, again, opens up that transparency box in terms of, we've talked about how a decision is reached. Then outcome analysis is kind of the next part of the jigsaw that CalypsoAI has been working on.
Yeah, and this idea came from a famous TV show in England called Little Britain. And so Little Britain has this character who tends to turn up in all sorts of places, from doctors, waiting rooms, to airports, to all over the place. And the character assumes the role of somebody at a computer. And there's always another protagonist who wants to achieve something, but they have to do it through this person. So in the airport, there could be someone coming up to the desk and saying, my flight's delayed. Is there any other flights today to Budapest? And the joke and the ongoing theme with this character is they type loads of things on the computer. You never see the screen, just see their face. And they say, computer says no. And it's just computer says no, computer says no, computer. And the frustration that the protagonist feels all the time is like, there's no why given.
Yeah.
And it's just no. And it's not even, there's no blame on the person, it's the computer.
Yeah.
The computer says no.
And that's almost a pre-meme. It's like you heard in conversation. The computer says no.
It's an old school one, but it's a good one. And so when you think about applying GenAI or agentic workflows to real life, and there's humans who should be the benefactor of all of this AI work. If we're doing it for any other reason, we're missing the whole point. And if that person gets told no, they should be able to say why, so that they can either change. So maybe it's a no for legal reasons. Maybe it's a no for you're on a service plan and you want to access this thing and you don't have permission because your membership needs to be up to the next level or whatever it is. But they need to understand why. It can't just be no. And for too long now, GenAI has been, when it's making decisions, it's just yes or no. So we at CalypsoAI were guilty of that. We would provide the industry-leading, best-in-class security scanners that would block malicious traffic, whatever was configured for that system. And it would be a yes or a no. And that's fine in the early stages. But as these things are being more and more used in production, in real life scenarios, it's critical that we don't just say, computer says no. And so for our customers, we want to do the best we can. And then for their customers, they deserve an answer too. And so outcome analysis is, the outcome is the yes or the no. And the analysis is, well, why? Was it a yes or why was it a no? And we provide you really easy to understand, here is the content that was provided. Here is the specific part that triggered this rule. And these rules, this thing has been around for a long time, but never with GenAI, because GenAI is this opaque black box, right? So when we apply a yes or no answer, you can't jump inside the GenAI system and pull apart the wires and see what happened. And so we've created a way, proprietary way for us to actually say, here's exactly the pieces that triggered this part in the GenAI. And so we feel like it's opening up that opaque lid and letting the light out, or letting the light in, maybe is a better way of saying it. So people have confidence on why we blocked something, the circumstances that were at the time, and the reason it was blocked in particular. And that's, in a nutshell, outcome analysis.
Wow. I mean, it strikes me that's the real world value of that is enormous to enterprises, to people, justifying spending decisions, justifying strategic decisions, technical people bringing AI into an organization, having that, explainability that we can shine a light on why it does what it does and why it reaches conclusions it did. And then actually, if you need to track back through a decision process where decisions were made, I mean, they feel like enormous leaps, even since.
And they feel they feel like things that, of course, just should be there.
Yeah.
And I always feel like if you create something that everyone goes, of course, that's obvious, that should be there. Instead of feeling downhearted and saying, oh God, nobody thinks our feature is cool, you go, oh wow, they had that expectation already. I'm glad we now fill that expectation.
Yeah. And arguably ahead of expectation. I mean, I feel like I say this all the time, but I can't overstate or understate. I always mix them up. How much I'm reading about AI and how much I'm following the sort of more mainstream stuff, let's say, and the absolute juggernaut that the large model companies are on, in terms of models and model intelligence and performance. Some are obviously more security focus than others. Some have zero security focus. And we at CalypsoAI, I think, are obviously, as a security company, are ahead of the curve on that, but are actually ahead of the curve on the transparency piece. Because, as you say, you unveil the new features, people say, well, that makes sense. That's where you want to be. That makes sense.
Yeah, because I guess security responsibility we have in security is not being outlandish, or if everybody's talking about what we did at the breakfast table, we're doing something wrong. Security should be in the background, keeping things safe, not in the foreground juggling.
Yeah.
And so when we release features, they are things that are necessary and important to facilitate the juggler front of stage. And so we want companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, Cohere, Mistral, all those, we want those guys doing the cool stuff and stuff that grabs the headlines. And we want to be the guys in the background making sure that their customers and the companies that build their software on top of their solutions can rest easy knowing that the excitement is there, protected by the mundane. And that's the features we create are to make all of the exciting stuff possible. And so transparent explainability never are going to be the juggler act in the front, but they're vital. And I would go as far as to say expected.
Yeah. Yeah. And I presume they're coming up in conversations with customers, with prospects, with especially at enterprise level. This isn't.
Because if they're going to, so in the computer says no example from Little Britain, if that person's boss came along and the protagonist said, "Hey, this person just keeps telling me the computer said no," the boss is going to expect it to go and find out the answer,
Yeah.
like to go past the computer and find out why this thing wasn't possible. And so our customers they are servicing their customers, and they're going to get asked questions. They're going to ask us. So we provide the capability to them so they can self-fulfill the questions they get from their customers.
Yeah. Now, you talked about the model developers, and quite rightly, they're doing the exciting stuff and all that. And the public facing, let's say, we do sort of hold them to account a little bit, obviously, in the monthly leaderboards.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of developments there in terms of agentic attack packs and how that's impacted security scores. So you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of not just for its own sake, but the agentic attack packs having, obviously, you can describe it much better than I can.
Yeah, I think I might start by saying that there was a body of research that went public yesterday from MIT on how, and I think the headlines are a little bit misleading, but the short version is that AI and agentic aren't leading to large scale profits for the companies that are investing in it.
It's a bit reductive, all right.
Yeah,
of the headline.
and I'm probably doing a disservice. I'm trying to watch my words a little bit, but it's critical to understand that a technology doesn't ever guarantee success. The same technologies and tools that were available to SpaceX were available to everybody else in the world, but somehow they managed to create a rocket that made caught out of midair. So, and that, they're one of one, right? They're the only ones that did that. And so with GenAI, it being so new, I think it's crazy early to suggest that not only is the jury not out, the jury hasn't been selected yet to decide if AI is going to be the massive multiplier that a lot of people think it is. Now, I'm firmly in the camp, and it's the hill I'll die on, that AI will be a massively beneficial thing for a huge amount of humanity. But it's super early. But the reason I bring it up is that we made the decision to go agentic first for a lot of the things we do a couple of months back. And our leaderboard up until last month was fully created by one of our data science team, Luke. And every month, hail, rain, or shine, we had 10,000 net new attacks that we would launch into our product. And then we would use that to share with the world the leaderboard standings of all the models that are out there, or the top 10, I should say. And so since January of this year, we've been doing that. And it's a huge amount of his time. It's really beneficial for everybody, the company and outside the company. But we identified that as the first thing we would build as using a new process, which we call an agentic pod structure. We've already built agents before that are really successful in our Red Team products, but we wanted to build one in a new way, fully embracing the novel challenge that is a opportunity for us to do something new with technology that's still being created. So anyway, besides all that, we went and did that. And long story short, we now have our 10,000 attacks every month fully agentically researched. The research pulled into Intel, the Intel used to generate novel attacks. And those novel attacks now have a higher success rate than our previous ones not because it's better or worse than a human, it's because it has the speed and horsepower to do huge amounts of permutations and iterations. And so the reason I link this back to my first statement was, if we had have built this even 2 months ago, we would have failed dramatically. And we might have then declared that agents are no good for doing this. In fact, they're phenomenal. And there are so many use cases right now, today, this second, that are absolutely applicable and probably way faster, more efficient, and better than a human doing it.
Yeah.
But it's still a tiny percentage of all things that are possible. And humans, there's no fear of us all living on lovely tropical beaches and sunning ourselves every day, eating or drinking cocktails.
Ah, Jimmy.
I know
Burst my bubble.
So I just want to, the bad side and the good side are both, far away.
Yeah.
So, but because we have this new capability, the leaderboard now is really more dynamic. Yeah. And what I mean by that is we have the ability to create, we don't know what novel attacks it's going to create every month.
Yeah, so just to repeat that, the attacks, well, the whole process end to end, including the attacks, are created by agents that have been built in-house at CalypsoAI. So, I mean, that's, I think, worth repeating.
Yeah, it's
you
super
talked to me
cool.
before about, in our most recent leaderboard, the math prompt attack, which was created by our own agents, by an agent.
Researched, developed, tested
without
by
a human,
our agent,
without a human laying a finger on a key, on that process. Yeah.
And but the speed of us doing that, or us not doing that, the agents doing it, is increasing. And so you now start thinking about it in a different way. So every time we make an advancement, it causes us to think differently. We haven't changed our mind. We've learned more. With Agentic, the speed that it can create novel attacks now makes us think, will it ever reach a saturation point? If GenAI models were static and no more were being created, if they were perfect and finished, then I think we would get to a saturation point. There would be some period of time where the half-life of effort would be completed. Finally, no more variations of attacks are possible. But because it's all moving at this, it's like, when you think about the Earth spinning around, and then you think, how do we stand still? And then you think the Earth's also spinning around the sun. You go, whoa. And then you think the galaxy we're in is moving in the universe. And you're like, how the hell are we all standing
That's
here?
too much thinking, Jimmy.
It's too much thinking. But it's the same thing with GenAI, right? You're saying, like, is the attack surface static? No. Why? The ecosystem's all moving as well.
Yeah.
Why? The research behind the ecosystem is all moving as well. So everything's just moving.
Yeah.
And so we're now at a stage where our thought process is, we have massively changed the game on how quickly we can create attacks, which also means we have to change the game on how we defend against that.
Yeah.
Which also means that the rate or the gap between a new model coming out and it being vulnerable is massively reduced.
Yeah.
So, but if you think about it that all sounds negative. On the positive side, it means we're understanding those gaps quicker. We're fixing or bridging or blocking those gaps quicker.
Yeah. And I mean, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the kind of activity that the agent or agents plural can do is ultimately what bad actors will be doing if they're not already, is building agents to deploy agents to. So Calypso AI probably has the closest thing to, can confidently say, we know how a bad actor employing or deploying AI will work. And I'm not saying absolute like for like, but we are using the techniques or ahead of the techniques that bad actors are going to be using on enterprise AI systems or on, is that?
Well, this is where the MIT research comes back. And if you were to take, I can't remember the number, but I think it was 95%, like, didn't achieve what they wanted. So 5% success. If you take 5% success as and it's a unfair comparison, but let's just use it for the sake of argument. You think of 5% success that on the attack side, and I would consider us within that leading or within that 5%. Are the other people in that 5% good or bad? And let's assume some of them are bad. The only thing that will give that edge is a combination of motivation and reward. So if the bad guys have the motivation and the line of sight to the reward, they are going to win that race. And if they have the same tools, like SpaceX example, if they have the same tools, same capabilities, same resources, then there's no reason they can't. So it comes back to motivation and reward. And so if we can't control their motivation, which we can't, and we can't control their reward, which we can't, that means we have to out-motivate them and out-reward them. And so that's what keeps me getting out of bed every day. My motivation is to beat them. The reward is something that will have to come if we're successful. And that's the thin line we have between attackers using the tools that we all have access to win, or defenders do the same.
Yeah. And to bring that back sort of to reality, let's say, to abuse that word, in the companies that we talk to and the customers we talk to and the events we attend, and I know you were at Black Hat recently, what is the level of awareness, the depth of questioning that enterprises are asking about this stuff that we, about, at its most basic, about what they're doing with AI, what they're doing with agents, maybe skepticism that we talked about 3, 4, 6 months ago has washed away a bit around AI and around in the enterprise, and then the security conversation. Sorry, there's a whole lot of subclauses in that question. But, but if we take your experience at Black Hat, and obviously that's an educated audience, but what were people talking about at Black Hat? What were they? What was the response to what CalypsoAI is doing?
So I would say the quantity of people at Black Hat was definitely lower this year. Just my own sense of it. It was easier to get a coffee type thing.
It's important.
Very important when your time zone shifted. The quality of question was way up. So last year it was a lot of education last year at Black Hat. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean we had to go through a lot of the basics with folks last year at Black Hat. This year, no basic questions. Really, really good depth of question and challenge to our answers, which we got no challenges last year. So this year it was like, how can you block things that are relevant for the EU AI Act? And we're like, well, here's how we do it. They would then challenge us and say, well, what about this? And the knowledge even of some of the items in the EU AI Act in the US, which is great. I know it's a global act by impact, but it's really interesting that folks in the US are really up on it already. And when we then discuss agentic, the other biggest reaction was skepticism on agent. So there's no skepticism on GenAI this year. That was last year. This year, everyone's like, yep, GenAI is here. I see it every day. This year, the skepticism is on agentic. And when we say how we do something, an unintended benefit of our transparency features were that we could actually prove and show that the agents are doing the work and how they do it and how they make decisions. And the reaction to that was universally ultra positive, because it's the first time people can visually understand something that's happening at machine speed in a virtual world, which gives them, I think, some satisfaction in that they can actually have some view and control on what's going on, but maybe more importantly that it's tangible. They can almost touch and feel what's happening. And in AI, it's so nebulous that that's something that's grounding for people when they're using AI, that they can show why something happened, how it happened, etc. So that was an unintended benefit of our transparency, our fingerprints, and our outcome analysis. But the other stark thing was how many other companies that they went to talk to that say they're doing everything agent, everything AI, but no depth of knowledge of how they do it, or certainly no representational view of how they do it, or information confirming they're actually doing it at all. So I think the skepticism shall remain high for a while, and the easiest way to brighten a room is to open the curtain, and transparency gives us that. So I suspect we'll see a lot of our competitors, if they're truly willing to share what they're doing and how they do it, add transparency to their products. And I would urge all folks in the security industry who are purchasing security software that say they use AI or agents to expect, and if not expect, demand transparency in the product.
Okay. I love the skepticism phase, because I'm one of those people, because
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember internet first time around, where very basic form, like a contact form on a website, and you'd fill it in, and actually the back end was email, and it'd go into someone's email at the company other end, and then they'd print it out, and then they'd enter it into a database.
Yes.
So it was like, and it was like end to end automation, and you knew for sure it wasn't.
And then they'd shred it afterwards.
And they'd shred it, yeah. So I love and I love that there's people coming to us and saying, that obviously we've talked a lot about education in the past, but are educated enough at this point to ask skeptical questions.
Yes.
And say, and that we then have, as a company, have the responses, because CalypsoAI has built agents that have, as you described really well, increased productivity, contributed to productivity, freed up man hours, all the things that agents at their best can do. And we're like walking the walk, or eating our own dog food, or whichever metaphor you want to use. So leading on from that, and maybe a little glimpse into the future of both for the industry and for CalypsoAI, does all that, obviously then you use the word somewhere in the middle there, remediation. So all that sort of leads the path towards remediation of, when things don't go as expected. Is that sort of the next natural conversation in the industry, or are we getting too far ahead of ourselves?
No, we are going to, just to put our money where our mouth is, we're going to launch our Purple Team product in the next 2-3 months, and it will
Big Purple Party.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was going to say something else there, but I realized it probably wasn't a good thing to say. So
Not unless it was about Barney the dinosaur.
No,
but
even at that, it's hard to find good things. But Purple Team is a little bit Ahab's whale in InfoSec. So when you say it, people kind of wince and go, "Oh, here we go, another Purple Team." The reason it's Ahab's whale is that the idea that you've got a self-healing system has been a concept for a long, long time. I even remember a BMW prototype that was built that could self-heal. And of course, we live in a world with, what are they called? The tires without airs in them.
Yes, yeah.
Run flat tires. Yeah. And, if anyone has a run flat tire and they get a puncture, you still have a puncture. So I don't know about that. But self-healing is always a really skeptical thing. And what you need to prove that is now different, that why it's possible, is that you are taking a raw input, which is the thing that's gone wrong, the problem, the threat. You have a system that can be customized in terms of defense. You need those two things as a prerequisite. And then the last part is the person in the middle who figures out how to use this tool to solve this problem, but not oversolve it. So if you have I guess a system where you can turn a dial left and right. Left is more restrictive, right's more open. And you have, at the first sign of a problem, you go fully closed, then you've solved the problem technically, but that you've solved a discrete problem and created a huge new problem. So it's a balance, and usually it's always been humans who could do that. And what's happened before now in self-healing systems is that a set of rules or heuristics were applied to try get the right notional dial left or dial right. And rules are created off things that have been seen before, and humans have decided are things that are built to solve problem X, or maybe problems X, Y, and Z. Whereas if you then take the raw input, have a tool over here, you give it an agent in the middle, and the agent's job is to create positive and negative test cases for that problem so that it doesn't overcorrect. So when it's creating a new solution, it doesn't like turn the dial all the way to closed or open it up too much so that more threats come in. That's the premise of our purple team. And it's only possible now in a realistic way for the first time because of the combination of GenAI and agents. So that's the remediation piece in the middle, to bring it back to the question, where we want to take the massively growing advances in technology and apply it to an age-old problem, but in a sensible, weighing up the pros and the cons way per instance. That's the solution.
Cool. Well, I hope it's going to be called Barney. I hope our
I'll put that on the suggestion list.
purple
Yeah,
team, that'll be my contribution, and probably not possible to trademark it given.
yeah.
But I mean, as I love the natural, the logical flow of all of this. Because as you said, none of this could have happened. Agentic Fingerprints couldn't have happened 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Remediation can't happen without transparency. Transparency can't happen without red team. So there's a kind of, it's funny when you're
Kind of like Darwin.
Yeah, well, when you're day to day in a startup and you're much deeper and much longer in it than I am, sometimes it's hard to see the flow, and then the flow comes through in the products. In the logical sequence of what we're all working towards. And what as an industry is going towards. So it's great. I'm going to wrap up, but I think I might have asked you this before, and it's this sort of finger in the air question. All of this sounds to me like it has applications, much more general cyber-security applications beyond just AI. So what's your crystal ball for the cyber industry and enterprise cybersecurity beyond AI? Is it much more AI seeping into or being baked into traditional security?
So my answer is it's going to continue to yield very high net new benefit and very real disruptive retrospective change. So AI will create new security challenges and solutions. So that's the AI, securing AI with AI piece. But because a lot of the historical InfoSec tools were built on last gen technology, it's also going to go, AI will go backwards and address some of those problems in much better ways. So it's an east and west approach to InfoSec. So in terms of this overused term, massive disruption, I think it's progress, right, disruption. And what that means is you now have, for all those companies that were happy with their position in the InfoSec table of like where they stood and where they would take huge investment or some sort of seismic event to cause that natural order to change, this is it. So you're going to see companies that maybe were written off before, leap ahead. Startups, like, everyone references Wiz as the kind of poster child for someone breaking through. They also were the poster child for showing nobody's not acquirable, right? So there's trying to be one of the strategic companies that stands alone. In an InfoSec world, there's been a natural order for a long time. We're seeing huge moves by those companies to defend their position, and we'll start seeing other companies attack those positions. And we'll also start seeing net new companies come to the fold. What's interesting with that is if you're an attacker, you might think, oh, they're all infighting, so it creates a huge opportunity for me to just undetected go and cause damage. And I believe there's an element to that, but it also means that everybody's trying to get better. So what's that thing? A rising tide
Raises all boats.
Raises all boats.
Yeah.
I was struggling there. I was like, what does a rising tide do?
Yeah.
But that's the other impact, is that the overall capability in the world to protect against attacks will grow because of this new competition.
Yeah. Excellent. And I mean, we could talk forever. And I'm always, my wrap up on all this is always speed. The speed that all these things are happening at is mind blowing, and it doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon. So,
No.
yeah. So we'll talk some more pretty soon. But thanks a million, Jimmy.
Thanks, Gav.
Loads of ground coverage. Really great. Thanks a
Cheers.
million.